Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Looks like we still have some people trickling in, so we'll take just a minute to let folks do that, and we'll start in just a minute.
Um, I'm trying it, but
All right. As we're arriving, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We want to know who is here with us tonight, where you're coming from.
There's no place to, it's not opening up into the chat mine. Maybe it's Elizabeth from Canada.
Thanks for being here.
Pardon me?
Thanks for being here.
Oh, of course, there's two people's groups that I really love, and Filipinos are the top. So I had no idea, nobody, of all the Filipinos that I worked with and lived close to and stayed at their place and eaten their food, not one of them ever talked about how bad it was there. So this was a real, like, I kind of figured because of the States, but I had no idea that it was so bad. And that most people said they left because they were too poor. But part of it probably was to get away from the Americans for sure.
Yeah, that's a
Anyway,
real.
I'm glad to help. I'm glad to be part. It's just like I just all of a sudden one day, this thing about Korea, they want to unite. That's north, south, and the north. This is where, and the women are leading the peace thing, and then they had this martial law, and now that guy, I think he's in jail somewhere, and it's just quite interesting. Not everything is doom and gloom in the world. Some things are working out okay. So I'm quite,
Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. Thanks for
yeah.
that. Okay, thanks everyone for introducing yourself in the chat. All right. I think we do still have some folks coming in, but I think we're gonna get started now. All right, again, thanks for joining our JBLM and Typhon Out of the Philippines national webinar. For folks who aren't aware, JBLM is an acronym for Joint Base Lewis-McChord, which is a major military installation here in Washington State. We're really going to get into it tonight. Richard, thank you for presenting the slides. Are we good to move in? All right. All right, sweet. We'll just do some quick intros. Hi, my name is Lorenzo. I'm a member of Anak Bayan Seattle, and here I've got our other facilitators who will introduce themselves.
Hello po, ako po si Brandon, member of Anak Bayan at University of Washington.
Hello po, ako po si Kid, member ako ng Anak Bayan University of Washington din.
All right. As I said, we've got Richard presenting the slides. Thank you, Zoom Tech. And we'll have some other folks that are helping to monitor the chat. So thank you so much. Really encourage your participation in the chat. We'll have a quick Q&A session and discussion at the end of our webinar tonight. So please feel free to participate in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will be trying our best to track questions to bring into the Q&A. So please feel free to participate. I will. Richard, if you could move us along to the next slide. Whoa, animations. Okay, yes, today we are going to go over the overall political economic situation of the Philippines with relation to Joint Base Lewis-McChord and its impacts in the Philippines, as well as its impacts for Filipinos here locally in Washington State. At the end of our webinar, we will be going over calls to action for everyone here on the call to take up in their area, in their organizations, with their communities, and to really build out the mass movement calling for the U.S. out of the Philippines. And great, yes, let's move into it. Let's get into the next slide. All right. we're really gonna just set the scene here. Here we've got a map, mostly water, but over in the top right corner, you can see a pin in Washington State where Joint Base Lewis-McChord is. It's just a short drive down the highway from Seattle, so it's actually very close to us here right now. Some other significant locations on the map. You can see San Diego, which is another major staging ground for military operations in the United States, facing the Pacific. You can see here in Hawaii, in the middle of the screen, that is where the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is based. And then over on the left side of the screen, you can see the Philippines. And particularly called out, we have Lawag City in northern Luzon, which is where we'll really be talking about JBLM's like specific uh, participation in militarizing the Philippines. And just really quickly, so we can get a sense of who here is on the call. If you want to just participate in the chat, I'm just going to do a quick activity. In the chat, please shout out if you know Filipino in the military, if you have family members in the military, or if you know a Filipino who found or got their citizenship, U.S. citizenship through military service. Would really like to know like how folks are seeing themselves connected to the military, U.S. military, Filipinos. Yeah, hands in the chat. Yeah, so we really want to see how Filipinos across the U.S. are connected to U.S. militarism, and what the systems are that create that situation. Yeah, thanks for participating. See some folks in the chat. Great. Okay, let's move on from there. Can I get the next slide up? And I think I'm going to pass off to Brandon to give us the overall political situation in the Philippines.
Yeah. I think first of all, it's just really great to see so many people from across the United States and across the world on this call. It's really amazing, and I think really want to uh, keep coming back to today what unites us, right? And all of us are here because we care about the Philippines, our homeland, right? And our kababayan, our Filipino people. So I think it would be really important to start off this webinar today, really talking through like what is happening in the Philippines right now, especially with regards to militarization. So something, I don't know if folks knew about this already, but do folks know about the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or the EDCA? Folks heard, yes. The EDCA is a military agreement between the Philippine state and the United States that allows for essentially U.S. troops and facilities to be housed, stationed, and built on Philippine facilities. Yeah, and even though technically these bases or these installations and forces are not supposed to be permanent, what we see is rotation. People rotating in and out of the bases so that the U.S. can maintain a permanent military presence in the Philippines. Something that this really is important to understand in the context of is the U.S.'s competition with its rival, economic, military, powerful rival, China. This is really important to understand, right? Because as you can see on the map, the Philippines is really close to China. And so the Philippines is a strategic outpost. It's very helpful for the United States to be able to station weapons, troops, etc., in our homeland because it is able to directly counter, right, the military and economic power of China, really close to China. Something that we'll talk about later in the presentation is actually how the United States has missile systems, especially something called the Typhon missile system, which is able to actually fire missiles from the Philippines to China. Last year, a Typhon missile system from the US was deployed to the Philippines. And we're actually hearing that there will be another one deployed this year. And importantly, those missiles actually come from Joint Base Lewis-McChord, which is in really close to Seattle, as Lorenzo was demonstrating. Something else that is happening as we speak. As we speak, there are actually thousands of American troops participating in war games alongside Philippine troops. And one of the things that is happening this year, these Salaknib and Balikatan war exercises happen on a yearly basis. They're quote unquote to improve interoperability, which we really understand as how well the Philippine military can fit US military interests and tactics and strategy. One of the things that's happening this year, as opposed to other years, is full live battle simulations, which is an escalation from years previous. These are actually also where the Typhon missile systems are deployed and they stay in the Philippines afterwards. So, as I was saying before, the US is really close to China, and we actually hear it from the words themselves of someone we'll talk about in a second, Pete Hegseth, US Department of Defense, that they're really looking to increase their military might in the Philippines and the Asia Pacific right now to counter China. And we really have to understand these different acts of US militarization of the Philippines in that context, right? We know from World War II, we know from the Vietnam War, right, that this unequal agreement or this unequal use of our lands as a military staging ground, our people as cannon fodder, right, in war, is really devastating. So it's something that we really are trying. It's one of the reasons why we're trying to wage the U.S. out campaign across the country, United States. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I was saying, just a few days ago, on March 28th, the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, met with Philippine President Bongbong Marcos to do a couple of things, and we're going to go into some of the main points next. Next slide, please. One of the things that Marcos' regime and Hegseth talked about was a quote-unquote joint vision statement on U.S.-Philippine defense and industrial cooperation, which, if you read into it, is actually a plan to really orient the Philippine economy around U.S. war priorities. So the different technology, parts, equipment that are needed for war. The Marcos regime and the United States are really planning to actually orient the whole Philippine economy, which should be used, right, to benefit the Filipino people in that direction. The U.S. also pledged $500 million of U.S. taxpayer money to the Marcos regime in the form of military aid. And then also those Typhon missile systems I was talking about, that's where Hegseth announced that they would deploy another one from Joint Base Lewis-McChord to the Philippines. And they would be sending other weapons, such as the Nemesis missile system, and also unmanned surface vehicles, which are basically like water drones. So again, we're seeing with this visit increased escalation of U.S. presence, U.S. military presence in the Philippines, which really threatens China, and also again puts our people at risk because it puts our people in the crossfire of potential war. And something we'll also get into too is that the impacts are not for a future war. The impacts of militarization of the Filipino people are already there, right? So, for example, next slide, please. One of the things that the Marcos regime is really trying to do right now, through a plan called New Horizon 3, is really ramp up its military, really modernize its military, right? At the same time that millions of our people go hungry, as someone was mentioning in the beginning, right? So many over 7,000 of our people leave our country every day to look for better opportunities, right? For a livelihood that they can't find in the Philippines. And at the same time, instead of addressing the crisis, instead of using government funds to really build up infrastructure so that there is jobs, right? Industry, or really genuinely provide social services to agriculture. the Marcos regime is seeking out warplanes. So actually, the U.S. just approved a $5.5 billion weapons package sale to the Philippine state, which is only just part of a plan involving trillions more pesos. You can see the highlights down the bottom of the screen, trillions and billions more pesos in the future, right? So that really speaks to the priorities, right, of the Marcos regime. Marcos regime is not serving its people right now. Instead, it's just selling us out to, right, the US's geopolitical interests. And so really, we see that also, and next slide, please. As the Trump administration, as folks know in the United States, is really unleashing fascist attacks on migrants, including our kababayan, right, Filipino migrants. Here are just some of the migrants, right, that Migrante and other organizations, Filipino organizations, the Tango Migrante Network here in the United States, are really working to support as they've been detained by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, in the US. As our kababayan seek the help of the Philippine government, right, which should be supporting them, right, which should be advocating for their needs, applying diplomatic pressure, right, to free them, and also applying assistance in the form of Assistance to Nationals Fund, or ATN. We're seeing the complete absence of that. Actually, just this, one of these people in the picture, the auntie with red hair, her name's Auntie Lynn. She's actually works here at the University of Washington, and she was detained down in Tacoma, which is very close to Joint Base Lewis-McChord, actually. She recently was in dialogue with the consulate about receiving Assistance to Nationals Fund, right? Which Duterte, when he was arrested by the ICC, Duterte and his attaché received ATN in a matter of days. But when Auntie Lynn, who is detained, who can't make a labuh anymore because she's imprisoned, asked the Philippine consulate for ATN, they told her her application would take 6 weeks to process, right? And didn't promise anything. So it really speaks again to the priorities, right, of the Philippine state, not being its people, and instead, right, buying billions of dollars of weapons. Next slide, please. So I think just really want to emphasize too, as this is happening, as there is militarization, there is U.S. weapons, U.S. troops, really infringing on our people's sovereignty, right? As many people in the Philippines, they're not blind to see the reality, right, that the U.S. is escalating towards war with China, in which their communities will be caught in the crossfire. As we're also seeing these attacks on migrants in the U.S. and the neglect of the Philippine state, the Filipino people, both in the diaspora and also in the homeland, are really not taking this sitting down, right? They're fighting back. So just in the past couple of days, there's actually been protests, right? Really calling for the same thing that we're calling for the U.S. to get out of our homeland, for the Balikatan war exercises to stop. And also, here in the U.S., in the diaspora, right, we are also really holding the consulate responsible, confronting the Philippine state that is selling out our people, demanding that not only they serve and really meet the needs of our kababayan, but that they also stop selling our sovereignty, right, to the U.S. So we'll talk more about how we can do that and get more into the details soon, and hopefully we can really particularize this campaign to the different areas that we live in. But just really want to give an overview for all of this. What all of this means is the time is really ripe, and the time is really necessary, right, for us as a Filipino nation, as one people, right, to really demand our sovereignty and call for the United States to get out of our homeland. So next slide, please. Across the United States and across the world, right, we're really waging the U.S. out of the Philippines campaign. And the main demands, right, the main things that we want to achieve, right, are the end of de facto U.S. basing and permanent troop presence in the Philippines, an end to all the unequal military agreements like the EDCA between the US and the Philippines, an end to the joint US-Philippines military war games and other provocations, an end to the US-backed counterinsurgency in the Philippines. So really holding the US military and US-funded Philippine military accountable for all of the violations against people's rights, and also especially those in the countryside, in the rural areas. And then we also want to cut US security assistance to the Philippines, right? We'll get into this more later, especially how we see Joint Base Lewis-McChord here in the Seattle area of Washington, really being a critical place for these demands. And so for that, I'll pass it over to Kate.
Sorry, as we rearrange over here. Thank you for your patience. So yeah, we'll be going into now specifically, Brendan and Lorenzo have taken us through the kind of overall bigger picture impacts of the US military presence in the Philippines and what that also means for the concrete conditions of our kababayan here in the diaspora. But what we're going to look at now is specifically what are the impacts that JBLM or Joint Base Lewis-McChord and the different ways that it deploys forces, deploys military equipment to the Philippines, what those impacts look like on the ground. So we'll be zooming in a little bit to talk about the Balikatan War Games that are coming up later this month that happen every year. I believe they're in their 40th year now, between primarily the United States, the Philippine government, and militaries. We'll be talking about the Typhon missile system and then also the HIMARS, which is another missile system, both of which are deployed from Joint Base Lewis-McChord. So can I get the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so things to know about the HIMARS, or the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. Both this and the Typhon missile system are administered by the First Multi-Domain Task Force, which is basically a committee at Joint Base Lewis-McChord that oversees a variety of different military operations. So those are, it's important to know, not only these systems themselves, but also the people administering them, right? They have names and faces. The HIMARS are manufactured by Lockheed Martin, which is a pretty well-known weapons manufacturer and war profiteer in the United States. The HIMARS have been tested and been put into practice at Joint Base Lewis-McChord as early as 2014. And then shortly after, were deployed to the Philippines for the Balikatan exercises. The first kind of noted use was in 2023, where they were deployed to Palawan for live fire operations. They were noted at the time for being used to sink ships. So really, and you can see too the path that they took when they basically took this missile system on tour to test its ability to travel along the archipelago, that they're really aiming it at the West Philippine Sea and targeting specifically Chinese military and just generally Chinese vessels that are in that area. At one point, they stationed it at Subic Bay and fired 6 missiles at a decoy ship as a live fire exercise. All of them missed. And each of those missiles costs 100,000 US dollars, which is equivalent to 5 million pesos. The family living wage in the Philippines is 1,200 pesos. So just one of those missiles that they shot into the ocean at a fake ship could have fed 11 families in the Philippines for a year. Just to paint a picture of the waste that, literally firing people's money into the ocean for the sake of intimidating China and trying to escalate into a war that none of our people are going to benefit from. So this weapon system is really meant to be used quickly, to be able to move around, to be able to fire and then move to avoid detection. But really what all of it boils down to is it's a huge black hole for resources for our people, right? For exactly like money that could be used for so many things other than war games. And it's coming right from our backyard here in Seattle in Joint Base Lewis-McChord. So next slide, please. If you think the HIMARS are bad, then I hate to tell you about the Typhon missile system, or also called the Strategic Mid-Range Fire System for the fancy military jargon. But this missile system was also developed by Lockheed Martin, is also administered at JBLM by the First Multi-Domain Task Force. It was first deployed in the Salaknib exercises last year, to which China immediately started raising red flags, started saying this is a clear escalation, because this missile system is the first time since the Cold War that a system like this has been deployed outside of the US. So we're seeing really unprecedented, use of and threats for use of force that are being sent straight to our homeland and being pointed directly at China. This missile system, from its positioning where it was initially deployed at Lawag Airfield, is capable of striking Taiwan and China. So China has repeatedly been calling for it to be removed, saying that it's very clearly such a direct, it's a weapon pointed directly at them. It's a clear offensive move. The Philippines maintains that it's defensive, but we're seeing very clearly is an escalation into an arms race. This missile was even banned previously by a nuclear treaty that the United States was engaged in, but Trump actually withdrew the United States from it in his first presidency. So this, up until very recently, this missile system was actually not, wasn't even proliferating. So this missile system has not yet been fired in the Philippines. It's been used in the Balikatan exercises last year and is likely to be used again this year to train troops on for its eventual use potentially. But there's a quote from the another multi-domain task force commander that they're, quote, always looking for opportunities to fire it. And when they do, those missiles cost anywhere from 1 to 2 million US dollars. That's 114 million pesos, which, again, each of those missiles could feed 260 families for an entire year in the Philippines. So again, we're seeing our people's resources and our people's, things that we desperately need. Funds that could be going towards our nationals who are being forced overseas and now detained. Instead, we're being told that the money isn't there. Instead, it's being shot into the sea for the purpose of intimidating China. So war hasn't even been officially declared, but we know that people on the ground are already seeing the effects. These military weaponry, these missile systems are being carted up and down the archipelago, especially up and down Luzon. And it's very clearly escalating into an arms race. So we wanted to also invite folks from back home to actually talk about what that looks like. So I believe we have someone on from Bayan Ilocos. If you would like to unmute or introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Reverend Father Arvin Mangrubang from Bayan Ilocos. And it is true that thing that the details that you are stating are quite true, because here in Ilocos Norte, the Balikatan exercises still continue, and military base was already established in our own region. Then there are a lot of effects happen here, most especially in the life of the Filipino people, because one impact that was transpired during the Balikatan exercises, the government or the LGU, they already gave a imposition of no sailing policy. no sailing policy is Ilocos Norte or Ilocos region are very is a place of fisher pox. So this thing until now, the compensation that was intended for them are not already distributed. Some municipality says that the one who would be given compensation are those people who are registered. But during that time, the no sailing policy was then not only registered fishermen or fisher folks are the affected, but the entire community was then affected. That's why those people right now are asking and begging the government for them to get the compensation that they promised during the time of Balikatan. Secondly, or primarily, the issue here in Ilocos Norte, uh, the security is quite threatened the Ilocanos. Why? If war will uh, begin between US and China, we all know that Ilocos Norte is very close to China and Taiwan. So the security issues here, what would happen? What would be happen to the Filipino people or the Ilocano people if war will broke out? Then again, the construction of military bases, they left those American troops here in the Burgos or Burgos municipality. So until now, they are here. They are roaming around within the municipality of Burgos, then even in Pasukin. Not only that, uh, they also left such uh, such thing as a missile equipment in Lawag Airport. But until now, the the missile was not located. We don't know where is it, and the missile is missing. That's why we are asking. Lastly, now some military forces are roaming around within the land of Fisher Fox, and they are recruiting them. According to our research, they are recruiting them to become a militia or to become a uh, arm of their war strategies. They are recruiting simple fishermen, and then they are making them as a they are training them to become a soldier under the U.S. Marine Brigade. So these are the thing that is happening. The strategy that they are making is they are preparing these fisher folks in the guise of community awareness within the issue of West Philippine Seas. These are those things that affect the life of Ilocano people here in Ilocos Norte. I think that's the only data that I could provide you right now.
Maraming salamat po, Father Arvin, for sharing all of the stories from on the ground and the impacts, especially from Balikatan and from the really predatory presence of the U.S. military on the ground and in their collaboration with the armed forces of the Philippines. One more question we had is, what are some of the ways that the masses and folks in Bayan are fighting back to gain their livelihood from the military oppression.
Come again, I didn't catch up.
What are some of the ways how people have been fighting back against the military oppression?
One way is we are the fisher folks here in Ilocos Norte are only depending their economic status on the sea, and I think they are afraid right now to talk about how would they defend their own selves. And one way is we, as a right defenders, we are uh, trying to educate them within to insist their rights. But we all know that this land is from the Marcos country. That's why Filipino or the Ilocano people are stop and stop resisting against the will of the administrations.
Yeah, as an Ilocano, I know know what that looks like. We definitely see it over here too. The need to really break through the understanding that these forces, whether they're from the U.S. and the Philippine state, they really are they really have the same interest, which is not that of the Filipino people, or the people that they promise livelihood to when they come in and try to displace the fisher folk and displace them from their livelihood. But maraming salamat po, Father Arvin, for sharing and for being on with us today.
Thank you very much din po.
Yeah. So kind of in closing, as we transition into talking more about the local impacts of Joint Base Lewis-McChord and what that looks like on the ground here in Washington State, just want to remind us that the exchange of these weapon systems back and forth, the exchange of troops back and forth, the operation of these war games that are displacing fisherfolk of their livelihood and also depriving our kababayan here of ATN, of meaningful assistance, I think really interconnects us and shows that there is a need to wage US out. And very strongly call for US out of the Philippines and also a JBLM out of the Philippines. And out of our schools, out of our homes, out of the livelihoods of our people. So with that, I'll pass it back to Brandon to talk about what the impacts of the base look like more locally.
Yeah. Thank you. I think something to really emphasize, and I think Elizabeth, you were mentioning this at the beginning of the call too, right? But so many of our people, because of the militarization, because of the fascism, right? Because of the repression and fear created in people who are just fighting for their family's livelihood, right? And also because of the severe economic crisis in the Philippines. So many of our people move abroad, right? To places like Tacoma, Washington, like Seattle, Washington, to everywhere that people on this call are from, right? And so really, it's important to really understand that, yeah, the roots, right, of our even being here around these bases like Joint Base Lewis-McChord are really rooted in the problems in the Philippines, right, including U.S. militarization and overall, right, U.S. domination of our country. So next slide, please. And what is the situation of migrants? Many of us, migrants, migrant workers especially, right? Many of us know this story very well. Being a Filipino migrant worker means separation from your family for decades. it means toiling away in the jobs that people in our host countries don't want, right? It's asking the Philippine government for help, and not receiving anything, right? Receiving silence or repression when you do speak out, right? Um, and our people make all these sacrifices looking for a better life here. And next slide, please. What they find is unfortunately another economic crisis. Just like the Philippines, the United States is also prioritizes military spending over the genuine social services, right, that our people need to be able to thrive, right? Um, so something to really emphasize is uh, the migrants and immigrants, right, abroad, um, because they're sending so much money home, the cost of living is very high, right? Many of them, even though they went abroad for better situations, better economic livelihood, many of them are also still in economic distress. Overseas Filipino workers are not, wealthy here, right? And that really creates vulnerability, right? And that vulnerability is something that the US military in communities of Filipino migrants and in general, right, of other migrants and working class people here in the US, that is something that the US military really exploits in order to be able to feed its war machine. Next slide, please. So, if you're from a US high school or you grew up in an area that was especially like working class or migrant population, you'll know that the United States military, has so much recruiting in schools, right? They will often create like physical competitions, like set up pull-up bars in low-income high schools. Raise your hand if you ever experienced that or had like military recruiters really in your school, right? They'll also do outreach, right? Really showing how the military joining the U.S. military, becoming cannon fodder, right, for the U.S. imperialists really is the way to go. It'll have benefits. You'll have free college tuition, right? And again, who are they offering these financial, economic livelihood incentives to, right? It's the people, it's who are poor, right? It's the working class, it's the migrants, including the Filipino migrants. I'm seeing a lot of people sharing stories everywhere where the military will go, right? To find people it can manipulate and recruit because of their vulnerable financial situation, including Filipino migrants. So just an example here locally of Joint Base Lewis-McChord going into the local high schools, which we'll actually hear about in a second soon with our next sharing. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. Keep sharing because so many of us overseas Filipinos, like Lorenzo was getting at before, have a personal link, right, to the US military, whether our parents were in it, whether we were in JROTC, whether our friends enlisted, etc. So another place, right, where the U.S. military really seeks to legitimize itself and prey on the lives and energy of the youth, especially, right, is in universities. So I just actually have some screenshots here of programs at local universities here in the Seattle-Tacoma area near JBLM, the University of Washington, which me and Kate are from, and also Seattle University. And we have things called Reserve Officer Training Corps, where college kids, right, will get free tuition to college as long as they participate in this officer training course and then dedicate some years of their life afterwards to the military. And you can't get out of it, or you have to pay back all of the tuition that they provided for you. So it's really hard to get out, right? And of course, right, for working class, for migrant families, right, this is really a way to achieve school, right? Right. And so the ROTC programs actually at University of Washington, at Seattle University, they actually go train very consistently at Joint Base Lewis-McChord, and the folks that train them are often Joint Base Lewis-McChord personnel. Something else that we have experienced even fighting against here on our campus at University of Washington is something called the U.S. Army War College Fellowship Program. The U.S. Army War College is really one of the many institutions and ways that the U.S. military will legitimize and try to produce research and information and propaganda, right? That will really make it look good and also actually improve its effectiveness. So what the War College does is it devotes university resources, so resources that the University of Washington has, to the training and research of Joint Base Lewis-McChord officials, officers. And specifically, this program, initiated in 2015, actually was meant to serve specifically in the pivot to Asia. So this was created out of the need to produce more and more research and information to strategize how the US can militarize the Asia Pacific, including our homeland, the Philippines, right? Right here on our own campus, right? So really shows the really cycle of militarization, of economic crisis and domination by a foreign power, right? And forced migration. Yeah. So the US military is both in the high schools, it's in the colleges, everywhere where there are youth, especially youth that can be manipulated or are vulnerable because of the economic crisis, right? Next slide, please. I'm just like, I feel like this is the very funny section because there is so much harm that Joint Base Lewis-McChord has on the not only right our people in our homeland, but also the local population. JBLM, or Joint Base Lewis-McChord, is also involved in the deportations, right? I don't know if folks have heard. Folks have probably heard and been fighting against, right? The deportation, the persecution of migrants across this country, across the United States. Joint Base Lewis-McChord is frequently contributing planes that actually carry or really kidnap the migrants out of this country and bring them to other countries. So just another example of the way that the military is harming people, right? Including Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Okay, next slide, please. And something that is really terrible to hear about, to learn about. I know a lot of us, when we were doing research for this this webinar, had a really hard time actually just processing and doing the research about all of this. But as we know, both in the Philippines and also in the United States, wherever the US military goes, it brings terrible violence against women and children with it, right? So, and the local area, right? The local area around Joint Base Lewis-McChord is no exception. So I just have some examples in the next few slides of stories of really terrible violence that have happened in the last couple of years that have been uncovered, right, to the public. And there are doubtlessly many more, right, that have not. So for example, an active duty Joint Base Lewis-McChord soldier who was actually sentenced to jail for going to the Philippines using his military credentials to do child sex trafficking and producing child pornography. Yeah, next slide, please. More about trafficking, more about assault, right? Even assault within the military, right? So all that to say, there are really tangible and real impacts on people, right? That the Joint Base Lewis-McChord and overall, right, the US military has on the communities that we're from, right? Both from in the Philippines and also from locally. And so really we wanted to bring in someone today who knows this story very well. We wanted to bring in, next slide, please. We wanted to bring in Claudia from Kabataan Alliance, Washington, to really speak on their own personal experience, their own interactions with the US military from from a migrant family as well, to really give everything that we're talking about real life and a fuller picture. So maybe Claudia, if you want to unmute and introduce yourself. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you all for being here. Out on a field trip with my students, but glad to be here. Thanks, Brendan, for introing. Yeah, my name's Claudia, part of KA, and I'm also an alumni of U of Seattle, and was part of PNI, Boston Saluda, AB Dub, and Esmasa. And really what brought, knowing. Oh yeah, Brandon comments on my critical migrants. It's true, my dad came here from Czechoslovakia in 1980s, and then my mom came here in 1999 from Cebu. And she immigrated here actually pregnant with me at the time and my older brother. But anyway, flash forward to like 14 years later. So I'm like this freshman in high school. My parents were working class. They took low-wage jobs. My dad actually was unemployed for a long time and disabled. So we were living off of like 29K a year my mom would make as a caregiver for a family of 6 of us. So me and my parents was here in Tacoma, Washington. And I grew up in poverty, living paycheck to paycheck. We didn't have any family here either. We were on our own. And my dad, like my freshman year of high school, my dad told me like, you really need to go to college so that you can have a better life. That's why we came here, for y'all. And the American dream wasn't all that they thought it would be for themselves. And my dad told me that if I do JROTC, they would pay for my college, like to join the military. And he was like researching it or something like that. I don't know where he got his info from. And for me, I was like, okay, well, that's the way to put food on the table and be able to like support myself. And I think the biggest thing is to want to support my family as well. I was like, okay. And so I enrolled in JROTC the following year, my sophomore year of high school. I was told that if I do JROTC, I could also jump ranks in ROTC if I joined in college. And if y'all are familiar with the ROTC program, essentially they promise you 4 years of fully paid tuition and boarding and everything that you need for your college, as long as you're enrolled in the program, which means you're engaging in it in the day-to-day life of the 4 years. And then also in exchange serving 5 years post-grad as well. Luckily, I was rejected because my sit-ups weren't good enough, I guess. I was trying to join the nursing corps, which is really competitive. But yeah. So I was a JROTC cadet in the Viking Company at Curtis High School in University Place. Spent 3 years in the program. And so one thing I really want to highlight from my first impression of the program, especially the point of violence against women. There was this one JROTC instructor, Master Sergeant, who had resigned 3 weeks after I joined the program. And I was really curious, like, why did I never see him again? Turns out he was dating one of the cadet students, one of my peers, this like 50-plus-year-old man in the military. They had been in a relationship, and so the school quietly had him resign. They actually got married and had a child together. And it's like this like really messed up, disgusting story. So yeah, I can really see even though it's like a JROTC program, right? They're run by actual military officers, and the culture, is there. And speaking of the culture, I have a couple anecdotes of just how terribly we were treated as cadets through like our boot camp. So every year in the fall, they would put us through a 5-day boot camp, which they would call basic leadership training, because I couldn't call it a boot camp because that's not allowed or whatever. And basically the goal of the basic leadership training, or BLT, was to break us down, like everything about like our morale, to bring us back up. And so they took away our phones, they put us in these like bunks, and from like 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. I was up and constantly being yelled at. They employed like JBLM soldiers, personnel, to come and yell at all the students that were going through this camp or like training. We would have to sit at like attention and stare straight. And if we broke attention, immediately we would be chastised, we would be yelled at. They would call us names. They would say like we're not worth anything, and just like really like messed up things to be saying to like 14, 15, 16, 17 year olds, or any person for that matter, right? So yeah, we had Marines yelling at us. We had these intense exercises where I had to, and there was like no saying no at all. It's always yes, sir, yes, ma'am, to the personnel. And yeah, the intense exercises, like they would dress us in BDUs, like battle dress uniform, and have us like jump into like a 10-foot pool to retrieve a rubber M16 from the bottom, and then have us like, it was just all these random things that we weren't trained to do, or like they didn't teach us how to swim, for example. It's just you had to do it. You had to jump in. And we had to do like a fireman, carry, they kind of like obstacle where I was wearing this heavy fireman gear. I don't know if y'all know how heavy that stuff is. And also I was like 80 pounds and I'm 5 foot, so I'm very small. So I had to put on this helmet and all this gear and run with a fire hose and do this freaking thing. And it was so hard, I actually collapsed and cried and had a breakdown. Which it's really interesting to think about, because I just thought this is just how it is. Lots of misogyny and sexism. They also like, not only did they have JBLM like personnel coming to yell at us, but they employed like the cadet officers, so other students to also yell at us. And so once I became an officer, I actually did end up yelling at like my fellow peers, underclassmen as well, and continuing like that cycle of just a lot of harm, lots of hierarchy. A lot of parents signs our kids up for discipline, or punishment for not doing well in school. All my friends in JROTC were poor, and we banded together because of that. Otherwise, there were a handful that were from legacy families with a military backgrounds. And like folks were saying in the chat, they will find you, they will text you on Facebook. And all this is happening, going through JRTC. We're doing like all this weird like hierarchy shit, and I don't know, also like forced labor, low key, or like unpaid child labor. We would do 12 hours of work, volunteer work, in exchange for a donation for businesses. That's how they like made money for the program. So anyway, it's just like, as I was doing this, I had no idea. Like even looking back at it now, it's very interesting to see it in this new lens. I think, anyway. And I also had no idea the direct ties that like JBLM had on my homeland, or that, I was entertaining the possibility of joining them in perpetuating this. And I also work at a high school right now. I've been working at a high school for the last 5 years. And it's so blatant to me as someone that went through that experience in high school, and looking back and seeing my students who are being targeted and preyed upon by predatory military recruitment practices. Tell me why. So I work at Clear Park High School in Lakewood. They have at least 4 times like a week, the military is recruiting, doing lunches, and like maybe 1 college a week. So it's just like the overemphasis. And I also know my district, they get a lot of funds directly from the military. So part of their budget is funded. And so I think that's why there's such a high military presence at my school. There was an investigation that found the vast majority of schools with a high percentage of JROTC enrollment were actually majority non-white and or low-income student population. So really wanting to emphasize that the people they're preying upon are folks like me, that come from working class backgrounds, that come from migrant families. Another thing is JROTC counts towards PE credits. And so that would be also an excuse. And yeah, just really thinking about, my parents, like my mom came from the Philippines looking for opportunity. They were displaced, from their homeland because of the occupation of the US on Philippine soil. And there's this terrible relationship between the Philippine government and US that keeps the economy developing. There's an export of Philippine labor. Thinking about how my mom's degree didn't count here in the US. And so the issue of like facing low-wage jobs, discrimination, and really being pushed to the edge for survival. For me, like joining JRTC was how I was trying to survive and helping my family survive. So Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that the facilitators would like me to switch on, but that's like the like less than 2 minutes. Um, but yeah, I think I'm still processing to what that experience was, and and it's something to unpack with the therapist.
Thank you so much for sharing, Claudia. Um, I'm seeing in the chat how many people can relate. I think it's a theme I keep coming back to. So many of us here in the US especially are here because our parents were scooped up by the US military, right? And to this day, in our own communities that our organizations are in, that our families are in, we're constantly seeing, right, military recruitment, people getting enlisted to get citizenship, right? Especially during this time, to get their family citizenship during this time when there's fascist attacks on migrants, right? So it really speaks to a need to really understand our people well. Because we share these stories, we really need to go out and investigate the specifics, right? And then also for the youth that are prone to being vulnerable, right, to these to the recruitment, right, to the military or being used by the military for their purposes. We really need to show them an alternative. We need to show them it doesn't have to be like that, right? Not only does, not only here, right? Not only here, but also in the Philippines, right? So that our families didn't have to leave in the first place. So to get more into that, maybe I'll pass it over to Lorenzo.
Hey, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Father Arvin, and thank you, Kate, so far for taking us through the content. Yeah, I think through the presentation, it's really clear that there is a need to have the US military out of the Philippines. But like Brandon was saying, the military presence of the US is only one aspect of the control that the US has on the Philippines. And it's really important to strongly understand that simply removing the military is one part. We need to have a strong solution to present. And we see that as the national democratic solution to the issue of US interference in the Philippines and its sovereignty. The US is using its control over the Philippine government and military through unequal military agreements, economic agreements, continuous war games, and joint trainings to wage war games, to wage this arms race against China. And JBLM, Joint Base Lewis-McChord, is a clear place that is supplying the weapons, the personnel to wage that war. And the only way that we can really ensure peace in the region for the Philippines is to realize its genuine national sovereignty, ending the military subservience to the US by getting the Typhon and the HIMARS missiles out of northern Luzon for fighting for the national democratic solution and being able to build up a just and independent foreign policy, one that's not influenced by the US's economic and political agenda. And Joint Base Lewis-McChord is just one face of US military here in the United States. And so we really want to broaden the call of Joint Base Lewis-McChord out of the Philippines. For folks here on this call, we wanted to really take up US out of the Philippines overall. So Richard, if you could move to the next slide. We're going to go through some of the calls to action. So April is our month of action. We know that the Balikatan exercises start this month, and we really want to have a strong presence to say we want the end of these war games. We want the US military out of the Philippines. We want to end the war on migrant workers. We want the US Marcos regime to know that the Filipino people are not pawns and the Philippines is not a chessboard for these war games. And so for folks on this call, we want to really emphasize the need to unite today to take up this month of action. And we can start that with a sign-on. There's a tiny URL tiny URL link at the bottom, but we'll have some QR codes both for an endorsement letter that you can sign on to for your organizations, and to also propagate that to your networks in your local organizing area to also sign on. Yes. Okay. So before we flash those links and also a link to some fundraising asks, let's go to the next slide where we'll have a little bit of Q&A time. And I am so lucky. We've had some folks tracking questions in the chat throughout the presentation. So I'm just looking through this list right now, and if I could have our my fellow facilitators to help with fielding these questions, let's just go ahead and start. From the chat, KT asks, how did the organizers in Washington State come to learn about Joint Base Lewis-McChord as a local target of U.S. militarism affecting the Philippines? What did initial research look like? And how did we go about informing local organizations and getting to this stage and building up the campaign to the point where we're sharing on a national webinar?
Yeah, I think speaking from, I think a lot of it initially was just a lot of us in our National Democratic Mass Organizations just know JBLM. We grew up around it. Our families have been a part of it. My family migrated. Both of our families migrated through by our family's members enlisting at the base. So a lot of it was just knowing really well our forces and the local SICA, the social investigation of, you know, how folks migrated here, what their political and economic conditions are. And then also we started uncovering ties at the University of Washington as well by just being integrated in the local happenings of the university. And we found out actually that there was a Joint Base Lewis-McChord official who was presenting his research on the Philippines and the deployment of troops from Joint Base Lewis-McChord to the Philippines. He was presenting his research through our international school. So we actually went and confronted him and disrupted his talk here at the University of Washington. And after that, started learning more about the partnerships and the ties that our university has to the base. I know we don't have someone represented here tonight, unfortunately, but Anakbayan in South Seattle are like the chapter in our area that's closest to the base has also been doing a lot of work with high schoolers who are in the high schools that are targeted by Joint Base Lewis-McChord recruiters. I don't know if you want to speak on it, even more involved in some of the other campaign work.
Yeah, I think something else is these units. So the first multi-domain task force, which wields from JBLM, which wields the Typhon and HIMARS in Balikatan, etc. They actually have Facebook pages. And one of the ways we figured out that they were involved was actually going to their Facebook pages, and they boast about their presence in specific barangays. Actually, they'll like share, and like folks were saying, right? They actually like do quote unquote like development or serve the people projects in the areas to spread pro-US propaganda and trick the people into thinking that they're their friend. So that was one of the other big things that we did was just go to their Facebook pages. Military units have Facebook pages with a lot of disgusting but very informative propaganda. Something else is we also filed FOIA requests, which is called Freedom of Information Act. It's a method that you can do in the US to request government information with the justification, right, that, you know, our taxpayer money is being you know, given to fund these things, so we should be able to know about them. And we are able to uncover more about the university's links with Joint Base Lewis-McChord. So, and the War College, that was helpful as well as a method.
Yeah. The Facebook pages usually have names like usually some number and then like a weird jumble of like military jargon. So, but a lot of times they all tag each other as well. So yeah. If you look up the base or like a specific military installation and then just kind of, you got to go down a rabbit hole a little bit.
Thank you. All right. From the chat, we actually have a couple questions for Father Arvin, if you're still online and can share. I cannot see.
Yes po.
Okay. Okay, so there are actually a handful of questions for you. People want to hear from you. The first question is, can you share more about the other ways that you see the Philippine government, maybe even locally, showing its willingness to cooperate with the US government and the US military?
As I already mentioned a while ago, the LGU of Ilocos Norte allow their places for different training, like training for military exercises on the mountainside. They train it open fire, and with that thing, they are also recruiting young men to become a civilian military forces. So the impact of it, most especially on the life of the peasant during those exercises, the environment was uh, destroyed, and even the production from mountainside, forests, and even in the sea was then destroyed. Like what happened last year in Abra and Ilocosur, uh, they used their weapon to bomb such a community, and by that thing is they legalize the militarization within that area. Then they are educating the people that these exercises is for us to defend our own nation, which is they are threatening the life of the people inside the communities. And even in the mountainside area of Ilocos Norte, uh, some uh, some camp was already established. Like here in Pasokin, uh, the other one is in Karasi, and in the part of Bintar, and even some parts of Solsona. So the militarization was then legalized, but I don't know what the government to want to prove inside these areas. But I think the great impact of it is they are recruiting young civilians to become military forces in our own community.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, there are actually more questions coming into the chat for you, but I'll read another one from earlier. Father Arvin, what is your message as an Ilocano to fellow Ilocanos about why it is important to oppose Balikatan and the US military presence?
For us, we need to oppose the Balikatan because the Balikatan exercises provoke the entire region. And we would like, as Ilocano, to expel the American troops and their facilities under the camp that they are already established. And we ask the Marcos regime that we should need to condemn them for its shameful surrendering our sovereignty and freedom of being a Filipino. And always, we want to oust the U.S. Troops here in the Philippines for their own political and economic interests.
Thank you. That's very helpful. All right. One more question for you that just came in. Someone in the chat is curious, how are you defending yourselves against the sort of military psyops and disinformation campaigns that are happening, such as the one regarding vaccines from China during the pandemic and discouraging Filipinos from being vaccinated, as an example.
One way is we are campaigning against the misinformation leading. We are roaming around inside universities, and then at the same time is there are some students who are uh, well trained how to give information that is happening inside our own province. We are making some forum against those Balikatan exercises. Then at the same time is we are giving them the exact detail that was gathered during our social investigation and class analysis under the communities where do we belong.
Thank you. I hope all of my Anakbayan friends on this call in Anakbayan USA heard that. How important it is, right, for the youth and students especially, for us to go out into our communities, right, to break through all of the pro-US, pro-Marcos, pro-Duterte ideas that are present, even here in overseas Filipinos, especially here in overseas Filipinos, right? And really help demonstrate and show to our kababayan, our communities, our families even, right, that the US does not have our best interests at heart, right? And it's really putting us in danger. So yeah, I hope everyone takes that inspiration. Oh, I see one. How much time do we have for questions?
We've got about 5 minutes left for
Okay.
questions.
I see a question from Josh C. from Anakbayan, Panorama City. And they said, in Panorama City, there are multiple high schools nearby that have JROTC programs and extracurricular club partnerships with the military. Predatory recruitment is rampant, and something that benefits recruiters is the economic crisis and displacement youth experience and the promise of opportunity that the military promises. And the question is, do you have lessons in engaging with youth in framing military recruitment as predatory and actually against their personal interests as Filipinos? We organize with a Filipino club here and want to engage them in this way as well. I'm wondering if actually anyone in Anakbayan, South Seattle can share more about that. Or anyone, maybe even Claudia, because since you're in the high school.
I can share. So yeah, I have a caseload of 60 low-income first-gen students, and a lot of times the military peers are coming at them, and I always have to be there to be like, wait. So I experienced a lot. And two things is one, understanding why a said student wants to join the military, or why, what are the reasons why people want to join the military in the first place. Whenever a student comes to me saying, oh, I'm thinking for the military, I always go, okay, let's talk about it. Why? Like, what is pushing in that direction? And a lot of times it's so they can support their family, or they can do X, Y, and Z. And then we talk about like so that's one thing, is like understanding why. And then another aspect is also telling them the truth, like just being really honest. My one student that just last month was talking to a military recruiter, and they had promised her that if she joined the military, that her military would be able to support her undocumented parents in gaining citizenship. And they made that promise to her. And that's, that's a lie. There is something in place that can do that, but it's a case by case basis. It's up to the discretion of and so it's just these outright lies. And so just really exposing those different things, and then also exposing the truth about like the military culture, how it's unsafe for like women, LGBTQ plus people. And I think firsthand like anecdotes are really powerful. So when people learn that like I did JROTC and did X, Y, and Z and able to share, they're able to really see clearly like what is the actual impacts. And I also talk about like what the United States represents in the defense sector, you know, what they've done in the history. So they have the full like true information. Um, and I also help them with like alternatives, you know, and accessing different resources, because a lot of times the students will come and be like, I feel like I have no other choice than to join the military. And I'm like, no, that's not true. That is, you know, and then also too, I also have friends who are vets, like veterans. Like my partner, he was stationed at JBLM for 5 years, and uh, it's always good for like a veteran. He's very anti-military, so to like talk to students and also share like, listen, this is what they're gonna tell you, like, and this is what's the truth. Because all the different things that they tell and like promise, and they do the same. It's like the same blueprint every time, you know. Uh, yeah. Anyway, this is just
Thank you, Claudia. I see folks in the chat mentioning about FACE as an organization of veterans that are also doing the work that you're saying of exposing the truth to young people, which is really important. Okay, I think that we are at time for our Q&A. Thank you so much for everyone for your questions. Richard, yeah, if you could share the screen. There was a request to show the calls and demands of the campaign really quickly. So if we could just go back one slide for just a minute, just to refresh ourselves on what we're here demanding. We're demanding an end to the war games, an end to the war on migrant workers, and for the U.S. Marcos regime to hands off the Philippines. So our calls and demands. And also for our organizations here today to really build out a national movement and to really take up the April month of action calling for US out. So now, Richard, if you could skip 2 slides forward so that we can show some QR code links. Oh my gosh, we actually have some dates. Take a screenshot. On April 11th, we'll have a Youth and Students Defend Migrants campaign report back, hosted by the Tanggol Migrante Network. On April 21st, there will be the National Day of Action calling for no to the Balikatan exercises. We're really, really looking for nationwide participation in the Day of Action. On April 28th, there will be the premiere of the Bayan USA Peace Mission documentary. Very exciting. Very exciting. Give you 10 more seconds to take a screenshot so you can catch those URLs. Unfortunately, we did not make QR codes for these ones. Thank you, Richard. If you could move to the next slide. Right. Thank you, everyone on this call for joining to learn. Here we have QR code 1 to sign the endorsement letter for the US out of the Philippines national campaign. That is the QR code on the left. And if you want to support the work of Bayan USA in our campaign work, please consider donating to support. There's a Venmo link. It's at Bayan USA, or you can use the QR code there. We'll just leave those up while we say thank you again. Thank you to our facilitators. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you everyone for joining.
I think also just to share too, it's not just signing on to the campaign paper, right? I think, is there a next slide also with Joint Base Lewis-McChord specific? But really want to emphasize that we want to build a mass movement, right? We want to build coalitions. We want to have mass actions. We want to mobilize hundreds, thousands of people to not just oppose US militarism themselves, right? But to bring all this information to our communities, right? So would really encourage folks to sign on to the coalition or sign on to the campaign, right? Because this campaign can be a place where we can share information, share tactics, share our stories like today, right? That can really inspire us to be sharing this information more and really turning the Filipino people against, right, the US, against US intervention in our homeland. I really appreciated Richard's comment where he talked about actually working with Bayan folks in the 90s and 80s in the lead up to the historic victory, right, that our people's movement had in actually ousting US bases. Before EDCA, US bases could just be in our country and they were permanent, right? Now EDCA, they found a loophole to that. But that was an initial huge victory of our movement, right? And we need to finish the job. Just like the Filipino people have been fighting against US militarism and intervention in our homeland since the 90s and for a long time, right? So have the Filipino people for centuries been fighting for sovereignty, right? Genuine sovereignty from the US, sovereignty from any foreign power, right? That will threaten us, that will take advantage and exploit our people, right? So as people in the chat are saying, we really have to finish the job. So just wanted to make sure, let's build a mass movement to finish the job.
That is it for the content of the webinar, I think, unless, okay, do you have anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay,
Good one.
well, that's it. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Ingat.
Have a good night.
Salamat po.
Bye.